Welcome to episode number 10, double digits episode of the NoFilter Weekly. And with me, as always, is Shay Namdarian. Shay, how is life treating you on this somewhat sunny spring afternoon?
No, good man. We're crushing it, man. 10 episodes. Yeah, it's good. As you would know in Melbourne, it's a bit of up and down weather. I think you get a couple of nice sunny days and a couple of rainy days, but yeah, it's not too bad, man. I can't complain at all.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, let's spare our audience the pleasantries and the goings on in our lives, and we can get right into this week's news. And one of the big items making the rounds this week, and it's also perhaps number one on our website in terms of trending articles right now, is the whole Spotify censorship issue or topic. And as some of our listeners might know, Spotify employees in New York last week lobbied the CEO, Daniel Ek, to censor the Joe Rogan Experience. So, of course, the Joe Rogan Experience was licensed by Spotify for $100 million. I believe it's a 3-year deal, which will bring the Joe Rogan Experience, perhaps the world's second most popular podcast, with 190 million downloads per month, to Spotify exclusively from December. And, of course, the conjecture or the dissatisfaction among some of those New York-based employees is that they're not quite happy with the guests, some of the guests that Rogan has on the podcast, nor the topics that are discussed, because those topics seem not to fit a particular narrative. What do you make of this, Shay?
Actually, just firstly, what's number one? You said it's number two. What's number one in the world?
It is a
I'm actually curious.
female podcast. It's literally about some girl who details the sordid relationships and adventures of her life. Most popular podcast. It was involved in a bit of a drama recently, from what I remember. It's not coming up, but let me know what you think about this, and in the interim, I'll bring up.
Yeah, no. I was just curious before I forgot. But in terms of this Joe Rogan stuff, it's interesting because they obviously license the Joe Rogan show, and you don't just go into it and go, all right, this guy's popular, let's get him on Spotify, right? Like, obviously they jump through some hoops. They understand what kind of content he releases. It shouldn't come as any surprise, the stuff that he's released and what he's probably looking to release over the next however many months that he's doing it, but or years. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's a slippery slope with these kind of things, as always, right? If you start pushing back on certain content, it limits his creative freedom. And as we know, just based on what's on the screen now with the episode he had with Musk a while ago, where they're just smoking weed the whole time, that is part of what makes this show so great, right? And as soon as you get people, stopping certain elements of it and, preventing him from talking about certain topics, it really does jeopardize the show. And I think in that article as well, you mentioned that the money is not a thing for him, right? I'm sure he's making a crap load of money from his podcast right now from ads and stuff anyway. Yeah. So I don't know, there's heaps of different layers to this, but it's definitely a slippery slope. What did they end up? What's the where does it stand now anyway, this story?
Well, at the moment, Daniel Ek, the CEO, has basically said that they've reviewed the material. They reviewed a episode in question, which was all about gender teenagers, and they don't feel that it contravenes or goes against their content guidelines. So he's basically standing firm. So kudos to him for standing firm, because like you said, it's a slippery slope. Once you start censoring one piece of content, then you need to start looking at your entire pool of content. And that's something that Twitter and Facebook have struggled with, even though Facebook has something like 15,000 content moderators, all sorts of algorithms monitoring content and moderating content on a daily basis. It's still an impossible task. And, like once you start playing that game, the question becomes, like, what do you censor? Who gets to censor it? Do 25-year-olds who work at the New York Spotify office, who probably hang out in West Village or Williamsburg and all have very similar worldviews. Do they get to decide what's best for the world? And that's when it becomes a really contentious issue, and one that has the ability to, because this is about a lot more than censorship, because if you are Spotify, and Spotify has spent several $100 million this year, $100 million for the Joe Rogan Experience, and $340 million they spent acquiring Gimlet.
Ringer.
Well, yeah, Gimlet,
Well.
Anchor, and Ringer, which I excluded or forgot to mention in the article. So that's close to $1 billion they've spent in trying to become the de facto go-to for podcasts. And podcasts are all about conversations like this one, and people listen to conversations, and it can influence their worldview. So if you're starting to make those decisions, then suddenly you're choosing what goes into people's minds. You're choosing what beliefs people have, how they choose to spend their time, their money, what causes they choose to support. And that's a very big responsibility. And it's much easier to just put the content out there, let people decide what they want to listen to, what they don't want to listen to, and let the best ideas come to the top.
That's it. And the show's, it's been popular for a reason, right? It's, it's got a certain style. It's that kind of just openness, chatting for 3 or 4 hours, whatever it might be. And as soon as you start, censoring what he's talking about or stopping what he wants to chat about, then it kind of just changes the direction of the show. It would be fascinating actually to know what is actually in the contract, so the licensing contract, right? So it's obviously 100 mil, I think, right? What's what are the out clauses? Like if they say, sorry, Joe, we can't do this episode, you can't talk about these topics, then can he go, screw you guys, I'm just going to go back to my normal podcast life where I was making a shitload of money anyway? Well,
you would think so. I mean, it's a licensing deal, so it's not a content development deal. It's not something that would typically give Spotify the ability to edit content, which is something the Spotify staffers in New York want. They want to be able to edit content and block content that they don't like, which like you say, it goes against everything the Joe Rogan Experience is about. And if they do that, then chances are those 190 million downloads will come down very fast. And you're basically paying for something that's not really worth it. But second to that is, of course, there would be some form of opt-out clause. Rogan himself said that nothing would change. We're going to keep doing it. It's just a licensing deal. So if they do go forward and against better judgment, decide to censor the show, then I can definitely see Rogan walking. And like you said, if you're getting 190 million downloads a month, say your typical podcast makes about $20 per 1,000 listens, that's 190,000 times $20 per month, right? So what's that? 3.8 million a month times, say, 12 months, you're looking at $40 million a year anyways.
Your Rain Man calculation.
I've got my Rain Man. I'm going to start slapping myself in the head soon. And crying about flying to Melbourne in any airline other than Qantas. Good old Dustin Hoffman. Yeah. How's Dustin Hoffman going these days? I haven't heard from that guy in a long time.
He'd be pretty old, I'm sure.
He would be quite old. Dustin Hoffman is now 83 years old.
80.
Look, he still looks good. I don't know how recent that photo is, but I still recall that.
Photos are misleading. It's the same with we digress here, but it's the same with LinkedIn and Facebook and stuff. I see some people on LinkedIn. It's like they might look like they're 30, 40 based on their photo, and then I have a video call with them, and they're in their 60s. They just haven't changed their profile pic for like years, right?
Yeah. Of course, there was that infamous or classic episode where Rain Man was spoofed on The Simpsons.
Yeah.
There's Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman playing poker where Homer Simpson is dealing, and clearly Rain Man has some issues because he started to pound himself on the head, and then Homer follows suit, and he's like, well, I guess that's what we're doing. So
that's the one where he obviously started working at the casino. I think Burns set up a casino, right? And Homer was working there or something along those lines.
Yeah.
I haven't seen The Simpsons for such a long time, but there's always something, we've talked about this before, but when it comes to Seinfeld and The Simpsons, you can always relate any part of life back to one of those episodes from each of the shows.
100%.
You play the scene.
I've pulled up a video, but it seems to be a German translation of The Simpsons, which is an experience in itself. Anyway, let's move on from that. But tying in with this whole Spotify social activism thing, and this tendency for companies to perhaps put too much emphasis on these social issues at the expense of their core mission. Nowadays, well, not nowadays, earlier this week, hearing a bit of background chatter there. Is that
It's not from me.
it's not you? That is interesting. Well,
Maybe hearing voices, mate.
while that plays, we will kick into the blog I was talking about, which came from the Coinbase CEO earlier this week. The Coinbase CEO, of course, is Brian Armstrong, and he issued this memo or blog post, whatever you want to call it, entitled "Coinbase is a mission-focused company," which basically goes against a lot of the prevailing wisdom, if you want to call it that, when it comes to these social justice causes within companies. And I mean, to cut to the chase, he basically said at Coinbase, we are minimally focused on causes that don't directly relate to the mission. So things like broader societal issues and political causes, we don't advocate for, he said. And he's basically said the reason for this is because while we think these efforts are well-intentioned, they have the potential to destroy a lot of value at most companies because you end up putting gender, sexual orientation, and everything else ahead of merit and someone's ability to do the job. And they can be a distraction and create internal divisiveness because you might be all for a particular cause, but perhaps you've got a whole lot of employees who have different opinions, but they don't feel comfortable speaking up. So you just breed this divisiveness. So he came out with this, which I think was really encouraging. And it was also interesting to note that Ben Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, one of the world's, if not the world's number one startup incubator, I mean, home to Dropbox, Airbnb, they all came out of Y Combinator. He basically said, yet again, Brian Armstrong leads the way. I predict most successful companies will follow Coinbase's lead, if only because those who don't are less likely to succeed. What do you think?
Yeah, no, it's fascinating that a company has to come out and say this, whereas to go about things this way, which is what normal people would just think it's just a part of business and what they should be doing. But given the way the world has unfolded the last year or so, I think it's probably makes sense for him to come out and make this statement, and hopefully, like Paul Graham said, it leads to a lot of other companies following suit as well. But from what I gather, they're not saying that they don't want their employees to have their own opinions and their own thoughts about whatever. It's just as a business they're focused on a mission, and they've got people on board that are aligned to that mission, no matter what their background is, no matter what their thoughts are, no matter what their political views are. And I think, is that fair to say? That's pretty much what he highlighted in the article as well. Yeah. So for me, that makes complete sense. And I hope a lot of other companies follow suit as well.
Yeah, I hope so as well. So I basically got to the root cause of those sound issues I was having. So apologies to the audience.
Go on. Just a quick one on that as well. It's just linking it to the mission. This is kind of like a little bit off topic, but I read an article the other day. Have you ever heard of Oscar Wiley, the sunglass company or the glasses company? So they're in the news last week, kind of linking back to that whole mission of the company. So they've got this thing where their mission or their values are around, for every pair of glasses they sell, they donate a pair of glasses to someone in need, or like a charity.
Kind of like what Tom's does with
and
shoes.
a lot of companies doing that, social, thing where they help out charities based on the purchases they get from paying customers. But what happened with Oscar Wiley was I think they had, like, over the last 5 years they've sold across Australia, I think anyway, they've sold say 300,000 pairs of glasses, and there was an investigation done, and it turned out they only donated 3,000 pairs to charities, and those 3,000 pairs didn't even have lenses in them. They were just frames. So they've slapped with like a $3-4 million fine just because of that. But it kind of comes back to that mission. There's no point having a mission and kind of those values if you're not going to stick to them and kind of push them forward in your organization. And it all comes down to the leaders actually pushing that forward, and the fact that the Coinbase CEO came out and made that statement. He's got to stick to it now and kind of push it forward and make sure that nothing kind of comes up as a roadblock to their vision and their mission.
And I think, as he rightly points out, when you're trying to build a company, especially something like Coinbase, which is looking to disrupt the financial industry as we know it, like that's a Herculean thing in its own right, and everything is stacked against you. So you haven't really got the ability. I mean, you wouldn't be well advised to spread yourself thin by focusing on all these other things that aren't really core to your mission. And if you do achieve on your mission, if you do become a successful company that disrupts financial services, that means you're creating some form of value because you're making money. And if you're making money, it means you can hire people. And if you can hire people, then your staff can go off and buy food and healthcare and education for their kids. And like, that's essentially what more could you be doing to support the world by creating economic value for it? Because that's got all sorts of downstream effects. And if you take the foot off the pedal to focus on all these social issues, which are well-intentioned, well, then chances are you might not create anywhere near as much economic value for the world down the track.
I like the fact that these CEOs and founders are putting out these public memos and kind of just talking about what they're doing as a business, because I think it's obviously twofold, right? They want to share, a bit about their business, make it a bit more open to the world, but at the same time, I think a lot of these founders probably do it from a sense of accountability. They're like, all right, if I'm going to telling the world this is what we're going to do, then I better, be accountable to this and actually push forward with it. So you kind of, you're more accountable to more people than just the internal organization, right? Which we've seen these big companies all the time, chop and change. They do restructures every year or two. They just go about these changes all the time. So internally these things happen, but if you're being more open, you're sharing these thoughts and these, missions to the outside world, then it does hold these founders more accountable moving forward.
Definitely. It can also help with hiring. So if you're looking to hire people who value diversity of thought and having that friction between ideas in your organization, which usually leads to creativity, then you're going to attract those people. But even on what you've said there, I think that's something you can apply in life. And a lot of people like to declare that, they're aiming to run a marathon by the end of the year, and they go off and they raise money from friends in support of that mission, which makes them more accountable, right?
If you're taking that money and you're just like, you know what, I'm going to sit on the couch, eat some chips instead and watch some TV, then your friends aren't going to be too happy.
Exactly. I know one of my fellow podcaster friends, Adam Jones from the What You Will Learn podcast, they basically discussed books on that show. And one of the books he reviewed was a anti-smoking book, anti-drinking book. So it was all about the perils of alcohol, right? And he read that and he said, oh man, I'm never drinking again. And this was recorded on a podcast. It was, I believe, when I was on their show about a year and a half ago. And I said, all right, well, let's see how long that lasts. Had them on my podcast about 3 or 4 months later. I'm like, how's that all going, Adam? I had a drink last night and the night before. And so sometimes those grand declarations can come back to bite you. And as young Jonesy discovered, but it's all good.
Nice one. What else is making news this week, Steve?
What else is making news this week? NBA is making news, I guess.
The finals are set.
The finals. So no Lakers versus Celtics.
Nah, we didn't get our dream matchup. So it's the Lakers versus Miami, which will be really interesting because there's it seems like the case every year, but there's always those storylines, those layers to every kind of championship series, and this time around, I reckon the most kind of the interesting part of it is so obviously LeBron James used to play for Miami. He left Cleveland, went to Miami, won a few championships there, but then he made the decision to go back to Cleveland, and
he's only won like 3 championships out of his 9.
They won 2. They went to to 4 finals.
LeBron's won 3 out of 9 appearances, so he's kind of
he's got his 10th
had a bad run, right?
Well, that's the thing, right? It's that whole LeBron versus Jordan debate. When they talk about the GOATs, and you think of Jordan 6 out of 6, LeBron's like 3 out of 9, and it could be 3 out of 10. Who knows?
Kind of like Collingwood here in the AFL. They've had so many grand final appearances, but like lost more than half, if not more. Well,
even he's come second a lot as well when it comes to MVP voting, right? So it's kind of he does so much to get to that last point, but then I think he's been second in MVP voting 4 times in his career.
Yeah.
But people still view him as like he's been in the league 17 years. and he's going to be making his 10th finals appearance, right? So that's 10 out of 17. That's more than, you know, 1 in every 2 years. And I was reading a stat the other day that said he's made more finals appearances than 27 other franchises. So that's like 27 out of 30 teams haven't been in the finals as much as LeBron in his 17-year career.
That list
nuts,
definitely
man.
includes the Phoenix Suns, who've
Yeah,
made
they're
2
definitely
finals appearances in their entire history. So
it's so true. So yeah, we'll see what happens there. But yeah, there's obviously that that animosity between, I know Pat Riley, who's the president of Miami, and LeBron James. So when he left Miami, Pat Riley had some stern words like to the media. He just said, you don't leave a team once you lose once. You got to be there, you know, for the full haul. You know, you can't win every year, blah, blah.
yeah,
LeBron wasn't too happy about it, and they pretty much haven't talked since. And now that you know, Miami's in the final against LeBron, there's gonna be that extra layer of motivation from each side as well. What are you looking at? Looking up Collingwood.
I'm just like comparing Collingwood Magpies, so the Australian Football League team, with LeBron James's finals appearances. So Collingwood has made 44 grand final appearances and only won 15, losing 27 and drawing 2, which I guess is why they're called the Collie Wobbles when it comes to the grand final appearances. But that is absolutely shocking. It's like 40% of all AFL grand finals they've basically been in, and they've lost the vast majority.
But then the question is it are you only a successful team if you win? Or are you successful if you kind of get to the end-ish part?
No one remembers number 2, mate. No one remembers number 2.
Like what's that movie with Will Ferrell? Like Talladega Nights. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's like, if you're not first, you're last. That's pretty much it, right? So, but yeah. So the Lakers Miami, it'll be an interesting series. And the other, I think, really cool thing is Eric Spoelstra, who's the coach of Miami. He's obviously been coach for a while, has won a few championships, but he actually started there in 1995. So this is 25 years ago. And he was like the video coordinator of the Miami Heat team. And there's a photo that's resurfacing now of him in 1995. And he's literally in front of this massive, massive computer doing some video editing. But the guy looks exactly the same. He hasn't, you think in a role that he's been in, he'd be aging like crazy, you know, have the white hair going on, the wrinkles. But
how do you spell his name?
Eric's ERIC, Spoelstra, SPOELSTRA. And if you type in, you know, video coordinator 1995, there'll be a tweet about it of just like an image of him doing it'll be on Twitter, but it's just really funny, like just looking in front of this computer, and you know, it just shows that if you've got loyalty to an organization, you've got the talent, hopefully eventually you get to where you need to go.
Yeah.
The guy looks super young as well. He's probably in his 40s. He looks like he's 15 still.
Yeah.
Good genes, man. Good genes.
Well, that's it. I mean, another example of that we've talked about. Yeah, he's 49. He's almost 50, Eric Spoelstra. Yeah. Another example of that would have to be Ralph Macchio. We've talked about Cobra Kai.
60, man. He's 59, 58.
60, dude. Like, and he looks fantastic for his age. Like, he does not look. He looks. He could pass for early 40s, and he's 58.
But do you reckon? I don't know. But do you reckon he's had some work done? I'm sure he would have, right?
It doesn't look like it though.
Yeah,
like, normally with people who've had work done, like their faces look a little bit uncanny. Like something, like as human beings, you have this innate ability to see if something's not quite right. That's like when you see these girls who have puffed up lips because they've got, you know, collagen or Botox or whatever. You're like, it just does not suit the rest of the face. And it's kind of like so whereas with Ralph Macchio, I just don't get that. And interesting on Ralph Macchio, he's actually older now in the Cobra Kai series than what Mr. Miyagi was in the Karate Kid.
That's nuts. Mr. Miyagi looked like he was 90, man.
Mr. Miyagi, so good old Pat Morita. So Pat Morita, during the filming of the Karate Kid, he was born in 1932, so he would have been 52, 6 years younger than what Ralph Macchio is today. That's hilarious.
But Ralph Macchio, he looks exactly like he did even in that first Karate Kid movie that he made.
It's insane. It's insane.
It's crazy.
So back to NBA. Who have you got in the final series?
So I hope it's a close one. So I reckon it might be like 6 or 7 games, hopefully. But I'd be picking the Lakers. I'd be putting my money on the Lakers, but I wouldn't be surprised if Miami wins. But I think just like given the year and everything, if the Lakers win, it'll be like that feel good story. Given obviously Kobe passed away this year and all that stuff going on, I think winning the championship for the Lakers, it might be a really good way to end the year. But Miami's, man, they're one of those teams. They're just like the underdogs all the time, and they just kind of just pull through with wins. And they've got a solid team as well. So apart from LeBron James and Anthony Davis, the Lakers, they've just got a very much I look at it as like a misfit team. There's like a bunch of players, but there's no guarantees they'll all show up every night. So I reckon the depth of the Miami team is definitely stronger than the Lakers. But I'd say hopefully Lakers in 7. Let's make it a 7-game series.
Yeah, I'm going to say Lakers in 6.
Yeah.
For no particular reason. But I'm going to say Lakers in 6.
And the thing about LeBron is if he doesn't win it, the storylines will just be, he's second best all the time, 3 out of 10, he's nowhere near as good as LeBron, as good as Jordan. And then even if he wins it, the storylines will be, it's 4 out of 10.
Yeah.
He's still crap. Like, he's never going to be as good as Jordan. Like, it's one of those things where he can't win in the situation he's in.
Well, that's because he hasn't won in all those,
Right.
all those opportunities. And if he does win, he's up to 4, which is on par with Shaquille O'Neal. But he's still behind. I think Magic Johnson had 5. Larry Bird,
Kobe, I think, had 5 as well.
And
a few others. There's some of those players.
There's some lesser players who have more,
that's
right?
the thing. There's those players that just float around different teams and they end up with fucking like 6 or 7
20
championships.
rings.
But no one cares, right? Because they might have had one good shot here and there.
Yeah.
They're not
Well, Satch Sanders, if you remember him, he has 8. John Havlicek from the Celtics, so he was actually one of the best all-time greats. He's got 8.
Yeah.
Bill Russell, 11.
What about Robert Horry, Horry? Let me know how many he's got, because he played in quite a few championships with I think the Lakers and the Spurs, and he moved around a bit. But he was one of those guys that was just a bench player, right? He hit a couple of big shots in big games, but he's not going to be known for his championships and for his career.
Yeah, Robert Horry has
like
7.
Kobe. 7, right? Yeah.
So he's got more than Jordan. So that doesn't necessarily make him better than Jordan. It's one of many attributes that you can use to measure someone's effectiveness.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah. Jordan, I think he obviously was he was the leader of the team. He did 6 out of 6. He did a lot more than just kind of win those championships as well. He made Space Jam as well. So he's got a good CV.
Well,
Jordan.
If the Lakers win, LBJ will be joining the company of the likes of Tony Parker at the Spurs, Horace Grant, all at the Bulls, Robert Parrish, and pretty much that's the only ones I recognize.
3 teams as well he's won it at 4, right? So Cleveland, Miami, and the Lakers. So I'm sure that adds another bow to his repertoire, or
sure it does.
CV. Yeah.
Well, from the NBA to the NFL, now in this age of social distancing, obviously the NBA has their Zoom crowds, but in an NFL game recently, in Denver Broncos NFL game, 2,000 cardboard cutouts of characters from Southpark appeared in the stands. Have a look at that.
That's awesome.
So
why Southpark? I'm sure there was some sort of promotion or sponsorship deal or something, right?
I believe there was, but I'm not privy to it. I just saw the image and I was like, that's cool. And let me not read any further. But basically, due to pandemic restrictions, only 5,700 fans were let into the stadium, with all adhering to social distancing rules. So basically, it was to promote an extra long South Park episode airing in the US this week. I believe it comes to Australia this week as well. And that's all about the COVID-19 pandemic, fittingly. So it was followed up by a tweet from the South Park account, which said that all 1,800 of us had a great time at the Broncos game today. So it's a pretty novel way.
I can't believe South Park's still going on. Like, there's not many shows out there that have had. I'm sure it's had like 20 or 30 seasons now. I don't know, but it seems like they've been on air for a hell of a long time, similar to like The Simpsons, right?
Yeah, well, the current season is season 24.
Far out.
So,
nice.
And I mean, admittedly, I stopped watching it back in like 1999, but I did realize it's up on Prime. I've got Prime account.
Yeah.
And all the seasons are available up there. So I'll definitely check out this COVID episode. I think that could be fun. But The Simpsons are on 32 seasons versus South Park's 24. I think the Simpsons got a head start, though. They came out about 8 years prior to South Park.
Yeah.
Having said that, I mean, I haven't seen any of the most recent episodes of The Simpsons, but I think they lost their way pretty much around the turn of the millennium. Like everything that came after that I have seen.
Season 10. Yeah. Season 10 onwards, terrible.
Pretty much, man. Like if you go back into the archives here, the archives are very long, but it was around season 10, maybe even 6 or 7.
I remember when I was younger, obviously the whole DVD box set thing was huge, and I used to have like season 5 and 6 and 7, I think, like those kind of seasons, and to me they were just like the cream of the crop when it comes to Simpsons episodes. It'll be interesting to see what like the younger crew, or the people in their 20s and their late teens think about it. They probably don't even watch Simpsons, to be honest. They're probably watching some of these other shows, or, because there's so much more content now.
They're not even watching TV shows. Like a lot of them would just be on TikTok and on Instagram and just watching 30-second bite-sized videos and just swiping for hours on end. I don't know if that's obviously a good thing, because your attention's always captured, and over time, your ability to sit and focus on one thing for longer than 5 minutes, no doubt, suffers and goes off a cliff. But and I guess that just reflected in smaller TV audiences these days. I mean, if you look at typical TV audience now compared to what it was, say, 20 years ago, it's nothing. I mean, 20 years ago, back here in Australia, we're all watching Hey Hey It's Saturday on a Saturday night. That was like a landmark weekly event. Nothing like that happens now.
Rove Live, you're like all these shows. I remember just it was Sunday nights were like the time to the prime time. The night before everyone went back to school and work, and it's kind of just that unwinding time on the couch. Pluck a Duck.
Pluck a Duck was an iconic character in Australian television.
I thought they tried to bring back Hey Hey Saturday, and like they brought it back for one episode, and it just didn't go anywhere. But you gotta like audiences and what people want changes over time, right? So what worked 15 years ago might not necessarily work as well in 2020.
Well,
but it's pretty cool.
I just noticed there is a Pluck a Duck Facebook page which has 61,000 likes, and he was featured in a KFC commercial recently. So Pluck a Duck, KFC.
It's funny, right? There's so many of these niche Facebook pages and groups.
2016.
And just like random people and characters or whatever. 2016 it was KFC, okay.
Yeah, 2016 he was featured in a KFC commercial. Good old Pluck a Duck. I don't know how effective that would have been, given that most people under 30 wouldn't even know what a Pluck a Duck is. So, yeah. Not sure about that one.
What a classic.
Moving on to other things making news on the NoFilter site. Let's jump into the spare tires killing your productivity. So, of course, I have a new book coming out tomorrow called...
Oh, it's tomorrow, is it? Jeez, time flies.
Time Rich.
Oh, there you go.
Do your best work.
Live coffee right next to you.
Your best life. Available at timerichbook.com, on Amazon, Goodreads, Booktopia, and where all good books are sold.
Read out one of the testimonials on there.
All right,
that's a good one.
Let's do it. I'll give you a good one. Steve Glaveski understands something that few leaders have figured out. It's possible to do less and get more done. This book offers a blueprint for working smarter. And this came from the one and only Adam Grant, New York Times bestselling author of Originals and Give and Take, and host of the chart-topping TED podcast, Work Life. So thank you, Mr. Grant, for that.
Very nice.
Awesome endorsement. So on the topic of productivity, which is essentially the core premise or focus area of the book, I published an article earlier this week about the spare tires that we all carry around with us when it comes to slowing us down and just getting in between us and our goals. And TIRES is essentially an acronym that I put together to make this easy to remember for people. So what does it stand for? T for task switching. So constantly picking up your phone, jumping from email to the web to your project management software. And every time you do that, you're basically exhausting yourself. Slowly but surely, you exhaust yourself and you deprive yourself of the ability to get into flow and do your best work. We say yes to everything, and that just fills our entire calendar up with meetings, back-to-back meetings, and we have no time for the stuff that we really care about and our own priorities. Residual work. You've seen Forrest Gump, right?
Yeah, a long time ago.
Do you remember
Run,
that?
Forrest, run.
Yeah. Do you remember that scene where he's playing gridiron? He's playing for a college football.
Yeah.
And he gets the ball and he just runs like lightning. He scores a touchdown and he just keeps on running. He runs into the change rooms. Well, that's what R is all about in tires, and that's residual work. Like we might be working on like a proposal for a client. You'll get that done in 4 hours, but then you'll spend another 6 hours tweaking the formatting and just, it's like when you've delivered the value, stop, move on to something else.
Well, we're probably both, I know in my early years, I was the culprit of sitting there in front of my laptop and just like moving lines around, boxes around, so they're all aligned. And I'd be spending hours each night, like till like 1 or 2 in the morning, just trying to make sure these documents are perfect. And yeah, in hindsight, I wish I kind of took a different approach in my younger years of my career.
Yeah, I believe there's a whole stack of management consultant GIFs on Giphy, which takes the piss out of that tendency to just move. There it is, this one. I'm not sure if you can see that on your screen.
Boxes around, right? And they end up in the same place after 4 hours anyway.
Yeah, it's hilarious. So that's definitely something that if you want to get more productive, just having a good relationship with that point of stopping when you've created the value. E, taking the path of least effort. So biologically, we're predisposed to taking the path of least effort, doing the easy thing because it conserves energy in our brains. So that shows up by sitting down at your desk and checking Twitter, jumping on LinkedIn, checking email for an hour. It's all easy stuff, makes us feel busy and important, but really doesn't really get us closer to our goals. And then finally, S in tires, shallow work, like just stuff that tying into E, it's easy to do, but it's like, well, let me write this email instead of write this 2,000 word article, which will require a lot more cognition. So obviously you want to ditch those spare tires, less task switching, say yes to things that align with your priorities, stop at the point of diminishing returns, get comfortable doing the high value, difficult work at the start of your day. And then that shallow level work, you can automate that, you can outsource it, you can give it to someone else, free yourself up for the high value work. And when you're done with that, go out and enjoy life. So that's essentially an article you can find on our site called How to Lose the Spare Tires, Killing Your Productivity. And I know having had access to your calendar for a little while, I know you like to time block, Shay.
Yeah.
How has time blocking helped you with your productivity? Or maybe explain what it is for our audience first.
Well, there's a couple of things I do, like is taking a step back. What I like to do, what's worked for me, but everyone's different, right? What's worked for me is every morning or most mornings, I like to just on a piece of paper write down just blocks of 30 minutes on the left hand side of the piece of paper. So 9, 9:30, 10, 10:30 and onwards, up until 4:35 or whatever, however long I end up working. And I just put some things in each of those blocks. So from 9 to 9:30, I might be putting together a proposal or something, right? And 10 to 10:30 is this podcast, for example, that we're recording. So I kind of just lay out my day. That way I know what's coming. I know what I need to get done in each of those blocks. And I have it's kind of like a guide, because what I personally find is if you've got a bunch of tasks and you just try to get stuff done throughout the day, you kind of go all over the place, and you end up switching tasks a lot more, which is obviously one of the items you just covered there, Steve. So I like to do that. Plus also to build on that, I like to put little blocks in my calendar as well, just to kind of remind me that, hey, during this hour, this period, do this every week, right? And when it's in your calendar as well, other people can't. It comes back to that other thing you mentioned around the whole saying yes, right? If you've got blocks in your calendar, someone's like, hey, are you free 2:30 to chat about this? I'm like, sorry, from 2:30 to 3:30 is when I do X. And it's already in my calendar. So they can't actually block out their meeting during the time I've got my thing set for that week. So it's a combination of just kind of doing a plan each day and trying to stick to it. which doesn't always happen. Like there's going to be things that come up and things that you don't get to, but if you're hitting it, 70-80% of what you want to get covered, then I'm pretty happy with that usually each day, because you've got random ad hoc things that come up. And then in parallel to that, I do the block out in my calendar as well.
Yeah. Do you find that doing that sometimes can be difficult? Like for someone who doesn't time block, when you introduce these sort of rigid, okay, from this time to this time you're working on this, from this time to this time you're working on that, kind of lacks a bit of flexibility. Do you find that can be difficult when you first start?
It's like, if you've never kind of gone down that approach, it's like anything new is always a little bit challenging and hard to kind of break a previous habit. But what I find that helps as well is I have a few, breaks in there, half an hour blocks that don't have anything. So those days where random stuff's coming up, I kind of fill it up in those blocks. So there's kind of that leeway in the plan. It's not like, I don't like the strict, like you have to do this at this time, but having those 30-minute blocks just free in that plan just allows me to kind of, something might be taking me longer than what I expected. So I can do that, or I might get a random call from a client that I'll have to take and things like that. So you got to have that flexibility. And like I said at the start, it's whatever works for people. Everyone's kind of, got their own approaches and things that work better for them, but that just seemed to work pretty well for me, and just allows me to stay a bit more focused throughout the day, especially with all these distractions around and, working from home. It's a little bit of a different environment. It's good to kind of have a little bit of familiarity in terms of the day and how you approach things.
Yeah, a little bit of structure goes a long way, I think, for people working remotely without the confines of the office, without the physical place that you travel to, which kind of turns a switch over in your head and tells you that it's time to start working. For those on the YouTube, like, I'm not sure if you can see that, but
kind of a reader, man.
that's my little time block for the day.
Nice.
So the time on the left and the task on the right. So usually 30 to 1 hour increments, depending on what it is. But tools like Calendly, where you can block out time for deep work and then have set hours for meetings, and then you can just send someone a link to schedule, say, 15 minutes in your calendar as opposed to 1 hour if they wanted some of your time. I find that's very, very helpful in terms of regaining ownership over how you spend your work hours.
The best is when you send that kind of link to someone and they reply, you're like, hey, can you book a time on my calendar link? Just click this and you can book a time. You'll be able to see my calendar. And they reply back saying, hey, Steve, are you free tomorrow at 9:30?
Yeah, that's always
it's a habit thing, right? It's for these people, it's just if something's unfamiliar, they'll just go down the familiar route.
Yeah. I mean, it's always good to just give them that option to start with and minimize the amount of tennis games you play, scheduling meetings. But of course, some people don't adhere to the request, and that's okay. Look, what I find more concerning and what I have a lot less tolerance for is when people write back and express how offended they are that you've sent them a link to schedule a time that suits you, when really it suits both parties. It's supposed to help us get to a time without playing tennis games. And really, I say that as people self-deselecting. Like if I get that from a prospect or someone, it's like, okay, I don't want to work with you anyway.
Exactly, right? You kind of weed them out of the process anyway. But I find that crazy to think people, come back with that kind of comments, which is just absurd. But it just shows you that probably a lot of people are still in that old school mindset, right? And they haven't kind of evolved given the current times and technology and just things being able to be done a lot differently and a lot quicker and effectively than previous days.
I think it's a cultural divide. So on the topic of work and business, I was on the Boost Your Biology podcast yesterday with Lucas Owen, and people can find Boost Your Biology at nofilter.media/boostyourbiology. And one of the questions he asked me was around PTs, personal trainers, naturopaths, these types of professions, which are quite saturated, particularly PTs. He asked, how would someone in that role go about differentiating themselves from the rest of the market so that they can stand out and earn more business? Now, I've got my views, and I published an article about it earlier today called How to Differentiate Your Business in a Saturated Market. But, I mean, what are some of the things that come to mind for yourself, Shay?
So So we're talking specifically around PTs and naturopaths and these kind of professions, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like for me, like I don't have a specific answer, but for me, the way I look at it, I look at, all right, who are their customers and what do their customers want, especially given that COVID has just changed a lot of needs and wants of customers and how they live their lives, right? And it's a matter of, adjusting your offering to what people want today, not what people wanted 12 months ago. So for me, it'll be around, understanding your customers and delivering products or services that meet their needs. So for me, it's like a simple thing where if I take a step back as well, what I found is, given COVID and everything going on, businesses have really had to fast track, obviously, their business models and what they do. And you see a lot of businesses now that use Zoom or Teams, and they've never ever used any video conferencing tools in their lives, right? This is brand new to them, but they're only being forced to do it because of COVID, not because they see it as a more effective way to do business and what their customers actually want. So even simple things like, having the option to do things online, making things virtual, using technologies to actually differentiate yourself from the traditional way a PT or a naturopath does things. Things like that kind of come to mind, but at the end of the day, you need to be solving, problems that your customers have and actually meeting their needs and wants given the current time. So it's a long-winded way to kind of touch on some elements that might be in your thinking when it comes to how they can differentiate themselves.
Yeah, definitely. And some of my thinking was really just inspired by the blue ocean strategy theory, which is, what are the factors of competition in your industry? So it could be like service, price, convenience, the distribution channel, like you've said, there's online, is it face-to-face? And what can you do more of, less of? What should you introduce and what should you eliminate, essentially? And there's examples of this with, say, the Nintendo Wii. When they came along, they were competing head-on in a saturated market with the likes of Sony PlayStation and Microsoft Xbox. Now, those two platforms, it was about graphics, it was about connectivity, it was about these games like Halo and everything else. Whereas Nintendo Wii said, well, we're not going to compete on that. We're going to compete on the motion sensor. We're going to make it more of a family fun type of console where young mums will pick up a console controller and just play tennis with their kids. And it became one of the most successful platforms of all time because they were able to unlock a new market, a new type of video gamer, as well as steal some of the Sony fans or make them fans of both platforms. So for those of you on the YouTube, you can see a strategy canvas of how Nintendo differentiated themselves from Sony and Microsoft. Another great example is the budget airline industry. So, no meals or really ordinary meals, no lounge access, no seating choices, like all that sort of stuff wasn't part of the budget airline business model at first, which meant that you could decrease prices, and it also meant that you could run more routes per day. You can run more planes every single day. And so the decrease in prices also meant that these airlines could unlock customers who would previously, say, catch the bus or the train if they were traveling across the continent, right? So, how can you be different? And we've got an article on the site called How to Differentiate Your Business, and it also puts forward a bunch of different things you could look at, like your revenue model, your costs, your service that you provide, the distribution channel you use, how you work, which is an example which I guess NoFilter is a great example of. I mean, very low-cost media company, big on automation, outsourcing, crowdsourcing, and it enables us to put out lots of content at a much lower price, which also means that we can charge less for our ads compared to other bloated media companies. It makes us more competitive in that space. So there's always things you could be doing. Sometimes it's just a matter of having a really cool brand that just makes you stand out from your competitors who may have some old school sort of branding.
Yeah. No, I remember during the GFC, or was it like 2009, with MailChimp, for example, what they did was they switched to like a freemium model because they knew a lot of people didn't have much, people wanted to start new businesses. They wanted to use the MailChimp platform, and what they wanted to do was just get as many people on the platform as possible. So they switched to freemium, and their user base just skyrocketed, right? And then since then, obviously, they've continued to hit home runs. So I think it's a matter of obviously what you've said, but also including that element of understanding your customers and bringing that into it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, one thing I wanted to just touch on, which I thought was quite extraordinary, if I can use that word, on this topic of differentiating yourself or
Yeah.
around cost. So, SpaceX nowadays, they're dominating the space industry, the space cargo industry. But what empowered them to do that was reorganizing the way rockets developed. So when NASA was creating or developing space shuttles, it used to cost them 1.5 billion US dollars per 27,000 kilo payload. Now, when Elon Musk was building SpaceX, initially he was getting quotes from vendors for parts, and they'd be like tens of millions of dollars. And this was something that no one really questioned before, because it's a small market of companies that are government backed, spending lots of money. So if you're a vendor, you're going to charge them a ton. Now, Elon looked at these component parts and he worked out what would go into making them. And he realized that if they made them themselves, if they manufactured these parts, they could bring the cost of a lot of these parts down by like 90%. And so they started to manufacture more of the rocket. And nowadays, compared to NASA, which is 1.5 billion for a 27,000 kilo payload, SpaceX for just $90 million, that's less than 1/15 the price, can get a 63,000 kilogram payload into orbit. So 3 times the payload almost at 1/15 the price. So that's like a great example of being smart about what are your costs relative to your competitors and how can you reorganize around that to give you a massive advantage when it comes to pricing for government contracts in the case of SpaceX.
And also, those numbers are nuts, but also questioning why, like, and not just accepting things for the way they are, like kind of going, all right, this sounds crazy expensive. Is there another way we can do it, right? So I think that having that, it's a mindset thing, right? And a lot of people don't have it. They just accept things for the way they are and just go about, because this has been the way it's always been done. So I think obviously Musk has that mindset where he's like, no, this should be better. We can do this a better way. Let's kind of question why this is the way it is and move forward with that mindset. And not a lot of people have that kind of thinking.
Not a lot indeed. And we might wrap up with some quotes from the first Trump-Biden debate, which literally wrapped up, I think, about an hour ago. Did you happen to catch any of the debate?
I jumped off for a few minutes, and it was like I find it so hard to watch these things. Obviously, I will watch it eventually, or at least read some of the quotes. But just like, it's like 2 grown men just like fighting, like just having a bit of fight. It's just so weird to watch. But I'm sure there's a lot of humorous things that came out of it.
Oh yeah, there's. I mean, firstly, I think Trump was his typical self, just talking. No respect for the moderator.
I remember like I listened to it literally for 2 or 3 minutes, and what Trump kept on saying was, Joe, you've done nothing for 47 years. You're useless. It's just like, take it easy.
So yeah, it was a lot of those sort of blanket statements, and of course, Biden accusing Trump or blaming Trump for shutting down the US economy, even though economies around the world were shut down by coronavirus, and Trump basically saying, yeah, Biden, you haven't done anything in 47 years. And of course, Trump just kept yapping, and Biden mentioned or said at one point, will you shut up, man? This is so unpresidential. Keep yapping, man. Trump to Biden, you didn't think we should have closed our country because you thought it was terrible. We've done a great job, but I tell you, Joe, you can never have done the job we've done. You don't have it in your blood. That's my best Trump impersonation.
Yeah, who was the moderator? Who's that guy?
It was someone from, I believe he was from Fox News. Surprisingly,
whoever he was, man, he had a fucking hard job. That's all I'll say. He had to like cut these guys off. You have to like go, you've got 2 minutes, and because usually he's like, all right, you got 2 minutes to talk. No one else can say anything. And then Trump jumps in halfway through when Biden still got another minute to go, and this guy's got to obviously moderate and bring in topics and questions and stuff. And that must be a pretty difficult job.
Yeah, it was Christopher Wallace was the moderator. He's actually from Fox News, which I find surprising because some of his questions were very, difficult for Trump to answer, and Fox tends to be very, very right-leaning. So that was funny. But look, I'm sure if our audience wants to tune into that, they can find a million places to do it. But I would just Google quotes from the election, and that will serve you up with lots of light entertainment. But ultimately, I think it was just 2 people yelling at each other like two old men at a bus stop, arguing
Yeah.
about something that happened 45 years ago that neither has that much recollection about nor evidence to substantiate. But that is the nature of American politics at the moment, unfortunately. I think on that note, we'll bring this episode of the Weekly to a close. Happy 10th episode, Shay, and I'll catch you next
episodes.
week. Yes.
I look forward to the 11th one.
So do I, mate. Cheers.
See you then. Cheers.
Bye.